Hello and welcome to LaunchLeft Podcast. I'm your host, Rain Phoenix. Today's very special guest is Tony Visconti, and he'll be launching Daisy the Great. Don't forget, rate and subscribe. Follow us on all socials at LaunchLeft. Please welcome Tony to the show. Welcome to LaunchLeft Podcast, Tony Visconti. What an absolute pleasure to have you here on the show. Wow, you're
pleasure to be here.
So moved by the depth and scope of your work over the years. Just on a personal note, my mom was born also in 1944 in New York, so I have an affinity to the year of your birth and the city of your birth, and it makes me feel a little bit like I'm at home somehow.
Oh, good.
I noticed that you have a bit of a British meets New York accent, which is very cool too.
Well, I was just in London for 4 weeks, so I reverted to that accent because I lived there for 22 years.
Right.
And give me another week and I'll be back into the 100% New York accent.
I love that. I'm kind of like that too. You have, like chameleon qualities. Wherever you go, you start talking like the people from there.
Well, it's like speaking another language because there are certain British words that we don't use in America. And so I use them when I'm there.
Mm.
And then the more I speak, if I'm there for like 2 weeks, I have more of a British accent. Although I argued with David Bowie once. I told him what I'm telling you right now. And he says, bollocks. He says, you've got an American accent. You don't have any semi-British accent whatsoever, So, but we always had competition with each other.
Oh, you did? A healthy competition, I assume.
Oh, yeah. Like brothers argue. Yeah.
Mm. Speaking of David Bowie, one of your most well-known collaborators, him and T-Rex, I would say. I had a question specifically about Heroes and
Sure.
How you got the vocal sound. I'm a singer.
The vocal sound on Heroes, that was great. We had we were working in a studio that was able to fit 60 musicians. And it wasn't one of these small vocal booths, which is 6 by 6 or something like that. This was an enormous studio. And I decided, like, when he sang loud, he would fill, because he had a very powerful voice. When David sang loud, he would fill up the entire room, like with this lovely tight reverb. It was only about a 1 second, 1.5 seconds reverb, and it sounded amazing. Back in the World War II days, they used to record the propaganda marching music in this very same studio. So it had a kind of a checkered history, but it was still an amazing studio. So I decided to put up 3 microphones, and because Heroes, he sings the first verses very quietly, and then he sings subsequent verses really loud, and he belts and fills up the whole place. So I set up 3 microphones, and when he was singing quietly, I told him to really hug the microphone right in front of him, be right on it, very close. And then I told him to step back a bit for the loud bits. And the other microphones started to pick up his voice and the room sound. Mm-hmm. And he was thrilled with that. He had headphones on, and he felt he tested it. He felt he could really work those microphones, and he tested how loud he could sing to turn on the other 2 microphones. So I don't know any other artist who was that disciplined, but he loved challenges like that. And he also liked to be innovative as well. So this was quite an innovation.
Yeah. I mean, mic control doesn't get enough credit, I feel like, like how to master that, the close and far away, and the difference in tone and timbre when you do that. And it's obvious that he was very disciplined and did find that sweet spot. You're known as producing, I think, more often in terms of in the music vernacular, but you are also an accomplished composer and string arranger. Was that something, do you have a keen love for that side of it? Or, did you favor one over the other, or were they kind of all part of the same for you?
Well, arranging and composing are virtually the same thing, because you get a melody and chord changes, and then the artist wants 50 pieces, So what are you going to do? You have to compose, and that crosses the line of arranging, because if an artist is singing la da 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 da, you might write a string part that goes da 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 like that, and that's me. That's not the artist going la 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 la. So that to me is so exciting. I love nothing better than to sit down with a huge sheet of score paper and start writing these things out as I hear them. And I could write about 80% of an arrangement without even a piano. I hear the orchestration in my head, and I know what the notes are. I don't have perfect pitch, but I have good relative pitch. Once I know the key I'm in, I know what the notes are. And that's how I've been writing for ages. Now, like in recent years, I've learned these programs where you could score. Like the most famous one is Sibelius, and it's not easy. It's not easy at all. Sometimes I'll go, I'm going slower on Sibelius. Where's my pencil and paper? I'm much quicker with pencil and paper. But to me, that's the very exciting part, because being a producer is a great job, obviously, but knowing all the jobs, like I'm also a qualified recording engineer and mixing engineer. I know everybody's job, and I'm in a good position as a producer to tell them what I think they can do better, or what they're not doing well. And I also, I'm a nice guy, so I don't hurt anybody's feelings. But I know everybody's job, and that's what I think. That's the reason why I've lasted so long in this business. I'm 80 years old, and I'm still producing records.
Yes, and doing a wonderful job of it too. I was listening to Daisy the Great versus Tony Visconti last night, and it's just so rich and such a beautiful body of work. I was like, wait, there's only 5, 6 songs. It happened too fast. I was really gripped by it. So obviously, you haven't lost any of your magic. One question I had back in regard to composing is, when you have an idea in your mind, like you said, the artist can spit out something, and then you start hearing this additional melody line that is all you. Is it like, and you enjoy that so much, but is it, you hear it in your head, are you just not happy to what's in your head is out on the song? Are you one of those people who's like immediately hears it and then you need to execute that? And is that process at all grueling, or is that all the same amount of joy as you get to that place?
No, there's nothing grueling about it. It's complete joy, because I didn't have this immediately when I started, when I was in high school, but I had a great music teacher who taught me to study the masters. So I would have recordings of Beethoven and Mozart and all that. And I used to go to a sheet music store in New York, right behind Carnegie Hall, which sold all these little booklets that had the Beethoven masters, miniaturized in a book that was maybe 5 by 7 inches. So I would like turn pages very quickly and then stop when I saw something. When I heard something, I go, wait a minute. I love the way this sounds. How exactly did Beethoven do it? And then I would analyze every, the 2 violin parts, the viola part, the cello part, the bass part, the French horns, the trombones. And I go, So I never went to university. I was, my last 3 years of high school, I was a music major. So when I got out at 17 years old, I said, I'm not, I don't want to go back to school. I want to go to work. And I did.
Yeah, well, and I think that work ethic, certainly in that time, in those years, was super important for a musician, especially one that ended up pretty quickly moving into rock music, right? It's like college of life is what I always call it. You just kind of got to jump right in. And it sounds like you did.
Exactly.
Were your parents very encouraging of this, or was that a difficult thing for them?
They weren't at first, because when I was 15, I said to them, I'm going to be a professional musician. And then my mother and dad said, oh, you're not going to make any money doing that. And I go, well, it's not the point of making money. It's the only thing I know how to do. And, my father was a carpenter, and he used to come home with bruised hands, and, he'd bang his thumb with a hammer. And I go, he wanted me to be a carpenter. I said, that's not the life for me. I don't want to do that. I just don't want to do that for a living. I worked with him for 2 weeks during a school break, and I really knew I didn't want to do that. It was tough. So,
Yeah.
so anyway, made the move into, I was already doing gigs at 15. I was doing weddings. I was playing weddings, bar mitzvahs. I knew all the Jewish songs for bar mitzvahs and Jewish weddings and Italian weddings and Greek weddings and I made a lot of money doing that. It was just weekend work, and in the end, I was making more money than my dad. But I also enjoyed doing those things because I used to work with older musicians who
Mm.
taught me more tricks. When I say older musicians, I was like 17, and the next youngest musician might have been about 38, and the oldest one might have been 50. So these old cats were teaching me all the old tricks, and I learned a lot more about arranging by working with them and improvisation, of course.
Now, it sounds like your high school music teacher had a really big influence on you in terms of, you know, giving you that insight into studying the masters, and by virtue of that, it led to your respect for like elder musicians and your thirst for knowledge within music that you weren't like a teenager who was like, whatever, I'm not gonna worry about what the olds are doing, which I think, at times now or in these generations, it's more rare that young people look to their elders for insight and abilities and are respectful of that. So that's really interesting. I love that you dissected Beethoven's instrument by instrument until you kind of found that sweet spot. And obviously that influenced greatly your composing eventually. You really thought about it in a almost like some people say math and music are so related, almost in a mathematical way, although I was terrible at math, so I don't always prescribe to that, but I do believe that they are sort of together. And it sounds like you were somebody who was disciplined and studied, but also up for the magic that happens in a room with musicians and followed your bliss. You seem to be someone who really loved music and followed that.
I love you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I loved early rock and roll, like people like Chuck Berry
Yeah.
and Jerry Lee Lewis and people like that. And I played, even younger than 15. At 13, I played in they used to have dances in churches, not inside the church, but in the hall attached to the church, for young people. And I played all those rock and roll songs on stage with local musicians who were my friends. And that was really fun, but it wasn't gratifying enough because I was already into classical music and also jazz. So a
Mm.
lot of these old guys I was working with were jazz musicians. Unfortunately, they couldn't make a living as a jazz musician, so that's why they were playing weddings and bar mitzvahs. That's where the money was,
Right.
and it would only be 2 days a week. You'd only do this Saturday and Sunday. And it was a great situation. I think living in New York City was. I had the benefit of these people. I think if I lived in Dayton, Ohio, I wouldn't meet anyone like this because this just didn't exist outside of New York City. This kind of nightclub culture and social functions culture, which we had lots and lots of it.
Yes, yes. My mom often would speak about things like that too, growing up in New York, going up to the Catskills for weekend music events and bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs, like you say. Um,
Yeah.
that's so cool. One thing I wondered, was there any one person that really was like a mentor to you in those early teen years? Or was it sort of multiple people that you just came in contact with?
It was one person, and that was my high school teacher, and his name is Dr. Israel Silberman. He was my orchestra teacher for 3 years and composition teacher. He got me out when he saw how talented I was. He said he took me out of all the kind of mundane classes. I had to do math, history, and English, which I didn't mind. But he made sure that my other My math isn't good. My other 5 classes would be music classes. He got me in the string quartet class, the music composition and theory class. In the orchestra, I played double bass. And in the marching band, I played tuba. And he taught me all these instruments. He was a
Wow.
master, this guy. And at the end, in my senior year, he and I stood at the front of the orchestra at the orchestra practice, and all the violin players, they were like young people. They would go up to Dr. Silberman or myself to tune their violins for them or their violas for them.
Oh my.
So I took a big burden off his hands by doing this, and he treated me so well as a result that we were kind of partners in a way. But he taught me everything. He was my sole inspiration.
Wow, that's so wonderful that you found that. And was this in the public school system there, or?
Yes. We
Wow.
had a great public school system. To have an orchestra and a military band, with tubas and trombones and all that. And we'd also play at football games, and when I would carry my tuba to a football game and play the tuba, and which was a thing. We used to play Lincoln High School, Erasmus High School. I was in New Utrecht High School. And there would also be, you'd play, if you played in those military bands and you went home alone, you would often be attacked by members of the other school because you were wearing the colors, the school colors.
Right.
And they recognized me as a New Utrecht kid.
Ooh.
So like the Lincoln High School kids would try to beat me up. And
Oh.
I told the one time that really happened in a big way was I heard thunder behind me. I'm walking down Borough Park, somewhere like that. I'm hearing thunder behind me. And it was like a herd of elephants. And I look behind me, and there's about 100 guys who I was the target. I was the prey.
Oh.
And they jumped on top of me. And no one punched me or kicked me. They just jumped on top of me. And I was underneath them for about a full minute.
Oh my God.
They didn't hurt me. They were just piled on top of me. Then they suddenly jumped up and ran off to beat someone else up, But I was very lucky.
Yeah, thank
And
goodness.
there were rumors when I went back to school on Monday. There were rumors that the other kids from New Utrecht saw this happen, and they said that I was killed. So
Oh my gosh.
I was like a ghost when I walked into school on Monday morning.
Oh my gosh. Well, we know that you were driven to music from your passion to make it, and you had an incredible mentor and teacher that really supported and grew that in you. Was there any element of knowing that you could get girls with music? Did you ever think like that? I know a few guys in rock and roll who say like, oh yeah, that was part of the motivating factor. Or was for you, it was pure music? Or was there also the like, there's some benefits to playing music. The ladies like it.
Of course, that also led to more a dangerous situation, because if I was playing in one of these church dances and I had a fan club, girls would come up to the stage and wink at me and like flirt with me and all that. Their boyfriends would come up and pull the girls away and give me a dirty look.
Eek.
And so it was a bit dangerous. Brooklyn wasn't a very safe borough
Yeah.
to live. There were all kinds of people from different ethnic groups, and you just had to watch who you were talking with and who you were dealing with, and be very politically correct. But girls was like, I didn't. I met my first girlfriend by playing in a band, and she was a lovely girl. I'm still in touch with her all these years later.
Wow. Well, and you're of Italian descent, so was your family? Are you first generation, second generation?
My dad was first generation. My mom and dad were born in America.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
so I guess I'm.
second.
Is that first generation?
I don't know. I think I think it's second because your grandparents probably immigrated then. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, three of them did. One was already in New York. He was born in New York. My grandfather was born in New York. Only one out of the three. Yes.
Real New Yorkers. Wow.
See, like around 1920s, my grandfather was a fiddle player as well.
Uh-huh.
And he worked in a band with Jimmy Durante.
Whoa.
The comedian with the big nose.
Yeah, I know Jimmy Durante. Yeah. How cool is that? So So you had music in your family. You weren't the only one
Yeah.
who was musical. Oh, very cool. And
Now,
and that, yeah. Sorry.
my father played accordion, and he sang in a couple of choirs. Mainly the biggest choir he sang in was the one that sang underneath the big Christmas tree in Rockefeller Center every year.
Mm.
And he joined that choir, and he loved that. He loved rehearsals, and he liked to flirt with the ladies in the choir. I found out later, but but he playing. He also played a little guitar. He actually showed me the first few chords on the guitar when I was about 11.
Wow.
And then my mother had this natural Italian singing voice. Our family came from Naples,
Mm.
and Naples is it's like the music capital of Italy. And
Mm.
so she could sing all the Italian songs in the kitchen while she's washing up and all that. Years later, I made recordings of her when she was in good voice in those days. And I said to her, I said, Mom, you could have been a professional with a voice like that. I don't know, why you didn't join an opera company or go to university. And she goes, oh, don't be silly. All Italian women can sing like that.
I love that. And off that question, I'd love to know how music found you. What was that first moment when you heard music and it just created that incredible magic in your head that drew you to know, like, this is something I'm going to be in relationship with?
I think it was my dad's record collection.
Hmm.
And when I was a kid, the only thing you could buy was these 10-inch 78 records, 78 RPM. And you'd only get about three minutes per side, just like a 45, but
Right.
bigger, like a 45 RPM record. And he had this huge collection, and he would play the music, and we didn't really listen to radio. We listened to his records, and he had quite a large collection. Unfortunately, I was a very naughty kid because I liked to play with them myself. So when he was away, one day I took them out, and I found that if you dropped them, they cracked.
Hmm.
So I did that to about 20 records.
Oh boy.
I was fascinated with breaking them. I was a little kid.
Did you ever use that sound when you went on to produce and make these more, rock and roll records? Have you ever mic'd dropping a record and hearing it crack out of curiosity?
No, but I have I've recorded breaking glass once. There was a bottle. I was making an album with a group called Carmen, flamenco rock group, and there was a bar scene in it. It was a narration, and there was music in the background, and there was a big bar scene where the lead singer he's being robbed, so he yells out the word "ladrón," which means thief in Spanish, and then we had to break a bottle, like pretending he hit it over the guy's head. And I'm telling you, that was very dangerous. So glass went everywhere. Luckily, no one's eyes. But,
Oh my gosh, that's
so
great.
yeah, we did our little sound effects. It was just, Bobby, the guy who said "ladrón," when we broke the bottle, he screamed on top of his lungs. So that was a natural response. He didn't realize this was going to be that loud and all that. So it's called Carmen, the group. It's a fantastic album. Bowie loved that group too.
Oh, very cool.
Flamenco rock, and they came from LA too. Most of the group.
What would you say is the most sort of outside the box experimental production idea that you created? That might be a big question, but something that you hadn't heard of being done before, and it could be it could be how you mic something, or any number of things. Is there anything that you feel like you kind of coined within production that you hadn't heard of before you started doing it?
Well, my claim to fame is the sound, the drum sound I got on "Low," the album "Low" by Bowie. It is kind of when you heard the snare drum hit, instead of going like that, it went like down in volume, and that's because I got this company, Eventide, made this thing called the Harmonizer 910, H910, and you could change for the first time in music. You could change the pitch of a sound of a note or a singer or anything without slowing down a tape. That the only way you could do that prior to that was you slowed down the tape and the sound would go lower in pitch, or you speeded it up and the tape would go higher. But also it would lengthen the note or it would shorten the note. If you're going high, it would shorten the note. But the harmonizer changed the pitch without the length change. The length stayed the same. And I did this prior to the recording of Low, and you might have heard this before, so excuse me if I'm repeating myself. But I was so excited about this machine, and I was just about to make Low with David Bowie and Brian Eno, and they talked about what they were doing. He phoned me from Switzerland, and I was living in London at the time, and he said, "What are you going to bring to the table?" And that was the very first time I heard that phrase. Bunch of grapes, I don't know, an apple. But I said, oh, I know what you mean. I said, well, I've got this thing called a harmonizer. And because no one heard this, I had the only one in Great Britain. I heard about it. I bought it. I had some extra cash. I had a couple of royalty checks that came in. I bought this thing. And they said, what does it do? What does it do? And I went, I said, it fucks with the fabric of time. And
Well,
I heard the two of them whoop on the other end. They're going, woo!
oh my gosh. I love
So
that.
when I brought this to Berlin, the chateau, the honky chateau, and we worked with it extensively on the album Low, and it besides dropping the pitch of the snare drum, it was used on so many other special effects. So that was very innovative. And as I said, I had the only one in Europe, so I was the only one who knew how to do these things and had the magic trick, which I didn't reveal to my colleagues because they were phoning me up all the time. That drum sound, I know how you got it. I go, tell me, how did I get it? And they go, well, you put a compressor on the drum and then you compressed it on the mix. And then I said, wait a minute, slow down. I'm writing all this down. Because I said, but no, I'm sorry, that's not the way I did it. I wouldn't reveal my secret for 6 months.
Ooh.
6 months I kept that secret. Yeah.
Good for you. That's how, I love hearing that they were like whooping on the other end of the phone. Did you really enjoy collaborating with Eno and Bowie together? I love that it was such a collaboration going on. Was that something that you find special in your memories, like one of, your favorite collabs, or do you kind of have that feeling for everyone you've worked with?
It was that was the most exciting team I belonged to, because none of us, we had no limitations. The way we always thought the same. There's always a new way to do something. There's always not necessarily a better way, but there's always a new sound to explore. And Eno, of course, did that. I'm doing that with these electronic things and microphone techniques that nobody was using before. It was a three-way collaboration. We created equal parts to go that went into Low, and also the same team we got together again on Scary Monsters. I'm not being cheeky about this, but Brian used to spend about 2 weeks on the album, the first 2 weeks, and he'd get all his bits done. He'd bring his little EMS synthesizer. It was like a synthesizer in a briefcase, and he'd do all these beautiful textural sounds, in which we would need a lot of analog tracks to record them on. And then he'd split. He wasn't around for the vocals or the mixes. So, but anyway, he kick-started them. He was a very important member of making those albums. So we couldn't have gone on. It wouldn't be the same if he wasn't there for the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, and historically in collaborations in record making, certainly with mostly men doing the collaborating, sometimes ego can come into play and create very inhospitable scenarios, to put it mildly. Did you, with those two, find a kind of grace together? Was there that kind of rub, or did you feel very much like everyone had their offering and it seemed to work seamlessly?
No, there was absolutely no jealousy, nothing, no competition.
Wow.
We were all going for the same thing. We wanted to just make the best record possible. And we knew that we needed to innovate in order to do that, because David already had a reputation with Space Oddity and all that
Right.
make records that were fantastic. Like they were fantasy scenarios, and we had to come up with sounds that, preferably we come up with sounds that no one heard before. We had to invent new sounds.
Right.
That was a key element in any David Bowie production. And
Yeah.
he demanded it of me. He expected it. And until the very last day, I'm actually sitting in the same studio where we finished the Black Star album.
Oh, wow.
And David used to sit over my shoulder here.
Mm.
And I remember turning to him and I said, because I've made about 15 albums with him, maybe counting or not counting the 2 live albums. I lost track. But I turned to him and I said, you have your choice of working with anybody. You could get anybody in the world to work with you, and you're still working with me, like especially on the last 4 albums. And he had no answer for that. He just looked at me and gave me a big wide smile, and then went back to reading the book he was reading.
Oh my goodness.
While I was doing a lot of technical stuff. So I mean, it went without saying. We were like, I'm not bragging or anything, but we were kind of like brothers. When we got together, we were like close brothers. And then, I wouldn't see him for maybe 2 years. He'd work with some other producer like Nile Rodgers. And I didn't get jealous because I was working with other great people, and not as great as David Bowie, mind you. But, I would pick up new stuff from working with other people. If David and I worked together exclusively, we might stagnate. You know what I mean? We'd same old tricks. But he was doing the same thing when he worked with people like Nile Rodgers. He was picking up tricks from Nile Rodgers and other people he worked with. So it was a good situation to not to make every album together. It was really created more creativity for us.
Wow. Well, it shows in the work that you did together. And I think, the fluidity too speaks to the feminine energy and the openness to innovate and serve the project, serve the piece, serve the artistry. There's something so just heartwarming to hear these stories, and that the connection was so deep, and that it really was about serving the project and not about individual egos or that's my part, I did this. And I think that future generations and the current generation could learn so much from that kind of deep collaboration that serves the music. And so I'm just so grateful that you came on and shared some of these special stories with us. I hope that people, especially young people, have an opportunity to listen to this and hear your wisdom. I'm going to ask you one more question before we bring Mina and Kelly in to talk about the incredible collaboration you all did for Kelly. I'm forgetting the name. Daisy the Great. Daisy the Great.
Lovely name, isn't it?
Yeah, for Daisy the Great versus Tony Visconti. And that is just how you came to work with T-Rex and Mark Bolan. Like, what was that? Who introduced you? How did that first happen?
Well, when I got to know Mark Bolan, I was working for my mentor, a guy called Denny Cordell. He was one of the biggest producers in London at the time that I met him, and he met me in New York and brought me over to London to work with him, to be his assistant, because he couldn't read or write music, and he specifically wanted me to help arranging and do orchestrations. And, Eleanor Rigby was all the rage, that string octet for Eleanor Rigby, and everybody in England wanted that George Martin kind of writing. So I worked by his side for a year, doing all these kind of things and working with his artists. And then after a year, he said, "It's time you found a group of your own." So I went, I said, "Okay, how do I do that?" And he goes, "Well, go out and go to nightclubs, look at people, listen to them and approach them." And I said, "Oh, it's that easy?" And he goes, "Yeah, it is." And I lived around, I worked around the corner from Tottenham Court Road in London, where they had a nightclub. I can't remember the name, but it changed all the time. But it was one of those clubs that had a name on the marquee outside, but they had every night of the week had a different theme. So I happened to listen to John Peel, who said on the radio, who said that Tyrannosaurus Rex is what they call themselves, is going to be playing in Middle Earth, which is a Tolkien invention,
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings invention. And so I said, well, that's right around the corner from here. So I went there, had a pint of beer ale. Sorry, I had a pint of ale at the pub, and I went at pub, and I walked down the steps, and I heard Tyrannosaurus Rex wafting up the stairwell. I walked in, and I saw these two guys making all this music. But what I didn't expect was the audience, instead of being screaming kids, there were about 100 kids sitting cross-legged on the floor, like Mark and Steve were sitting cross-legged on the stage. And this was like John Peel's doing. He got this whole, fan club through he was the only DJ who would promote Mark Bolan. All the other DJs on Radio 1 hated him. They really disliked Mark Bolan because he had a weird voice, So long story short, I gave him my card, not my credit card. I gave him my business card, and he came to see us the next day. He phoned from the street, and he goes, we're standing out here on the street. Could we come up and audition for Denny Cordell? And I put my hand on the receiver, and I said, Denny, this is the band I was telling you about. And he goes, ask them to come up. So they came upstairs. They sat on the floor in his office. They sang a few songs, and he said, okay, we'll call you. And they left. And then he said to me, we'll take them on as our token underground group. That's his exact words. I'll never forget that. So because underground was a big thing, So
right.
That's how it started. And
wow, that's
I don't have to, then Mark Bolan became a rock and roll band, and he wrote Get It On. So, it's a long story.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, but you brought up George Martin, so I'm just going to do one more question, which is in regard, I know you composed strings for Wings, I think. Is that right? You did compositions for Wings, Paul McCartney's record. But in regard to everybody wanting sort of a George Martin composer or string arranger for their record after, obviously, the Beatles being the biggest band in the world, were you... did you know George? Did you study his work? Were you friends with him? And did that influence, if yes or no, did that influence or not influence your work on Wings with Paul McCartney?
Well, the answer is yes to most of those things you just asked. I did meet him. I always tell people my two inspirations are Beethoven and George Martin. I think George Martin was a modern day Beethoven. He was so skilled, absolutely skilled. And I mean, it's not well known that he played a lot of piano and harpsichord on the Beatles albums, but he was also an oboist. He played oboe too.
Wow.
So this guy had been around the block a few times. That's why he's George Martin.
Right.
So then I did meet him, and we got on great. We met in a cafeteria at the BBC, and we ended up having lunch together. And he was very charming, really, really, really charming. He listened to everything I had to say, and I told him how much I loved him and how great he was and how he was an inspiration. And there was only one clash. During Band on the Run, Paul McCartney asked me to orchestrate the album, which I was flabbergasted that I was even asked. But I did meet George Martin again around that time, and he was bruised. He didn't like that. And I forget exactly how he expressed it to me, but it was cold. I got a cold feeling from him, and I mentioned the album to him, and he just clammed up, So I feel bad but it wasn't my idea, it was Paul's idea to use someone different, someone fresh,
Mm-hmm. And I assume you had a good time working with Paul McCartney on the records you worked with him on?
Absolutely. Great time. I went to his house he phoned me up and he said, did you know those T-Rex records you produced? And I said, yeah. And he said, they have strings on it. Who wrote the strings? Did you write the strings? And I said, yeah, I wrote all the string arrangements. He goes, okay, can you read and write music? because he's used to dictating. He couldn't read music, you know.
Mm.
I said, yes, I could read and write music. He says, okay, well, I'm making a new album, and it was Band on the Run. Didn't have a name yet. He goes, I'd like you to write the arrangements for the album. And I just put my hand over the phone. I started to sweat and almost cry, you know, because I idolized those guys, you know.
Of course.
So I said, okay, where do you live? And he gave me his address. And I went to his house. I think it was the next day. He phoned me, or he called me like on a Friday, and I went to his house on a Sunday. And all the McCartney children were playing on the floor with their toys and yelling and screaming. And then Paul and I were at a piano, and he had a cassette recorder, put a cassette in, and he played me snitches of the snatches, little bits of the songs, only the parts where he wanted arrangements. He wouldn't give me the whole song from beginning to end.
Wow.
So this is where I want the strings. And I go, well, I have to know how many bars were before. I have to know the beginning of the song so I can say 8 bars rest or something like that. And he goes, you don't have to. We'll work that out on the sessions.
Wow.
He was guarding his album so much. He said, I don't want to be bootlegged. I don't want to get bootlegged. And I said, well, I wouldn't bootleg. You know, I'm a professional. I wouldn't bootleg your record. But anyway, that's how it started. So I had 2 days and I said, oh, when do you want this for? And this was Sunday. He goes, Wednesday. And it's like 10 arrangements, 10 full arrangements. Some were little and some were huge. But
you didn't sleep. You didn't sleep much.
I didn't. No, I didn't sleep. I didn't sleep for 2 days. No, and I got up. I went there at like bedraggled at 10 in the morning to facing a 50-piece orchestra.
Oh my gosh!
And I had to conduct as well. But it was okay. I got through the day. I mean, you know, you get this special energy, like when people are trapped under a car, somebody has energy, they pick the car up. You know, you just don't think about it.
Exactly.
So I had that kind of energy.
Yeah, and I think too, like when you're really in touch with who you are and why you came here, like the reason you came into form, in a physical form, and you are not only aware of that, but pursuing that. It's magic, the energy that lives inside all of us when we remember like why we're here, what we came to do, and we're executing on that. It's as if we have the power of, you know, unlimited power. It's as if we have unlimited power in those moments, because really that's what we're all here, is to get in touch with that and to know why are we here and then execute on it, and all the hills and valleys of that are part of it too, and they lead us to that great awareness in ourselves. And you, sir, are just an exemplary example of that, someone who followed their muse, excuse the pun, and really stepped into their power and helped the careers and lives of so many musicians, and so many ear holes got the benefit of that. And so thank you so much for your contribution. We all thank you. You're just an incredible artist. And I feel so grateful to have talked to you. I'm going to bring the lovely and amazing Kelly and Mina in of Daisy the Great now to join our conversation. So nice to meet you both. Thank you for your patience.
Thanks, Rain.
I was sharing with Tony how great your EP is.
Oh, thank you.
How lush, and the vocals. I actually was going to ask you about the vocals for some reason, because the project is called Daisy the Great. I had the assumption that it was one singer stacking all these harmonies, and I was like thinking that, you know, it was one person at the time, which I like that I heard it that I listened to it that way, and then to discover when I really like dug in, I was like, oh no, it's 2 vocalists, but your voices blend so beautifully together, and the harmonies are so unique, and the layers within the production, nothing shocking. Look who we're on this Zoom with. But it was really a moving piece of music altogether. It's like one gorgeous combination of, I don't know, just like, it feels very inspired. Like all of you touched on something very inspired. And I wanted it to keep going. I was like, it's too short. wait a second. This isn't an album? What's going on? Let's keep going. So congratulations. And I feel blessed to have the opportunity to speak with you all, and wanted to just ask you what your experience was like all working together.
It was amazing. It was so much fun. It was really interesting because we started the project without really knowing what we wanted it to be. So we had this freedom that kind of continued throughout working together, that felt very much like we could just follow whatever felt fun, and we could follow like something that was, one random creative idea that felt interesting that day. So there was like a really prominent sense of play on the record that I really appreciate, that you don't like often come across, the feeling of like not needing it to be something and just letting it become whatever it is. It was really fun.
It was really cool to like write and record and then put the music out kind of in sequence. I think usually when making a record, it's like, years and years of songs that you've written and you're like compiling into an album. At least for us, that's what, maybe not years and years, but a couple years of different points in life and like building an album that way. And it was really cool to like write from where we were at and all in the room together, and be like coming from a place of how we were feeling like over the past year, and kind of jamming on those ideas. And I thought it like Kelly said, it came from a very playful and like impulsive place, which I think you can hear in the music. And I think that also collaborating in this way and working, like writing the songs, the three of us, you hear all of our like unique voices all together. And I do think it sounds like something very special and unique, and not like any one of us, but like all of us together.
How did you all come to the name Daisy the Great versus Tony Visconti?
We were talking with our manager about naming the record, and we had been talking about calling it Spectacle. We also were kind of like, maybe we call it like Tony Songs. Like it kind of just felt like we were trying to figure out how to put it all in one name. And then our wonderful manager was like, I thought you guys should say Daisy versus Tony. And we were like, versus? Like, what do you... But then we were like, oh, that's actually cool. It reminds us of like boxing, and that imagery actually kind of lends itself well to the record, because there's that sense of like we were going for meeting of the minds, like one night only, big extravaganza, like and that feeling of, as Mina was saying, like something impulsive, something that feels raw, and like the energy is high. So then we started to roll with that imagery for the record, and it became Spectacle, Daisy the Great versus Tony Visconti, which felt epic. We wanted it to feel like important. But it was a fun name.
Yeah. And like boxing and like performance, like boxing is like both like impulsive and choreographed, and like it's like a dance, and there's tension and there's spectacle. There's a lot when you're like going to see a boxing show, that I thought it would be cool to like combine those things.
Well, it was a great idea. You completely took me by surprise when I saw that. It was great. I laughed myself silly. So well done. Well chosen.
Thanks, Tony.
What was it like to work with Tony? Ridiculous?
It was unbelievable. Yeah, it was horrible. No, it was unreal. I would never think that we would have that opportunity. So it was really fortunate that we were able to meet. And honestly, it was just kind of friendly and casual. It was really, it felt like friends making a record. It felt very similar to how we make records in our other spaces. But I was really appreciative of Tony's warmth, and he really welcomed us into his space. And it felt very amazing to be sitting on the couch and going in the booth and everything. So it was like at both moments, incredible and unreal, and also like really warm and calm and safe feeling.
And Tony, did you play any instruments on this record?
Well, I started to I created the I knew what the songs were, and I made backing tracks. So I did basic drum programming, and I played bass, a little bit of guitar, and I just made the space. I just created the structure so that they could add the rest. I wanted more of them than me. It was, I always say the artist's name is bigger than mine. So, what's the ego all about? So we had a great way. So I would write these arrangements, very basic guitar, bass, drums. That was it. And they'd be sitting on the couch behind me, singing to each other and writing. They would be calling out lyrics to each other like furiously. And they blah, 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 da, da, da. I'm hearing all this going on. I'm not even finished yet. And they've written the song behind me, the lyrics
Wow.
and the melody. So it was definitely a strange way. I've never had such a nice experience co-writing with people. And it happened so rapidly. It was almost supernatural, honestly. They are supernatural. Those two women are supernatural.
Oh, so cool. Sounds like you guys had a lot of fun, and you did it in such a, like Mina was saying, in a almost linear, if we can say that, fashion, which is, you were writing, you recorded, you finished it, you mastered it, and you put it out. Wow. Like that's so it's really a timestamp of your time together, and I think that that's part of what I'm hearing that sounds so alive about the EP. It's like it's happening in real time. You almost feel that like this is very alive. And so well done. What a beautiful collaboration. And I'm just so glad that you guys found your way to LaunchLeft and share with us any upcoming plans you have. Are you going to be playing live? Do you have a website we should know about? We'll put all that obviously in the body of any of our text related copy, but also just for our watchers and listeners out there, if there's anything you want to share upcoming, please do.
Sure. We are writing always. But we're working on music, and our website, I'll say our website is daisythegreat.com. And if we have any shows or anything, it'll go right up there. We don't have shows booked currently, but there will be things that happen soon.
There will be announcements soon. They're on we'll put them on our website. We'll put them on our social media, like our Instagram mostly.
Okay.
We have other ones too, but we made special shirts and cassettes for this EP that are on our website too, with the album art on it. Tony, I have a shirt for you. We just have to get it for you.
Yeah. I'll drop by anytime with the shirt. Don't forget the shirt.
Gosh, that would be wonderful to hear that. You guys, I love this. Like, imagine, to me, it's like Tony Visconti saying, drop by anytime. Come on. You guys are on that kind of relationship with him. How wonderful.
Of course we are.
I love it. Yay. Well, thank you again for sharing your time and love of music here on LaunchLeft.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day. See you
too.
soon. Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.
LaunchLeft aims to create an intentional space that highlights and empowers all artists for whom radical creativity is not a choice, but a necessity. LaunchLeft begins with music, but its ultimate aim is to launch left-of-center artists in all creative fields.